You sit down to rest and the guilt comes right away, as if stopping is a sin. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. Byung-Chul calls this the performance society, a world where you become a company of yourself, charge yourself, watch yourself, exploit yourself, and still think that the debt is personal. The question is simple. Who put that voice in your head, and why does it speak louder just when you try to breathe? This guilt is a symbol, an alarm of the modern collective unconscious, the fear of losing value when it is not producing. And that's where the shadow comes in. You project at rest the image of failure, of abandonment, of the wounded ego. You are not only tired in the body, you are tired of holding up a mask. The path begins with conscious detachment, silence within, emotional self-control, and the journey of individuation, where you regain inner growth, protect your high vibration, and understand a hard truth. Rest is not laziness, it is resistance. 1. Programmed guilt. Let's start the way it hurts. This guilt was not born with you. It was installed. It is a reflection of the time in which you live. A collective unconscious trained to confuse value with performance, love with utility, respect with result. You don't feel guilty about resting because you're weak. You feel guilty because you've learned that you only deserve to exist when you're delivering something. And this is brutal because when you buy this idea, rest becomes a threat, silence becomes danger, the pause becomes a sign of failure. You begin to live as if you are always in debt, owing productivity, owing response, owing energy, owing smile, owing presence. And then, when you try to stop, your own nervous system reacts as if you were making a mistake. It's as if the body says, if you stop, you lose. And this phrase is a program. Byung-Chul speaks of a type of violence that does not need a whip. The system doesn't need to hold you back, it just needs to convince you. It gives you apparent freedom and puts the charge inside you. You become your own foreman. You turn the hand that squeezes your neck, and the fault is the invisible collar. Now think about something. How many times have you rested and, instead of feeling spiritual energy, felt anxiety? How many times have you tried to relax and your mind has pulled you back to tasks, goals, messages, comparisons? This happens because rest is fighting with the identity you were taught. The identity of, I am only someone if I produce. And here, Jung comes in surgically. Programmed guilt is a symbol. It is not just emotion, it is a message. It reveals a hidden psychological shadow in you, the part that believes that if you are not helpful, you will be abandoned. This is an old wound. That's ego wounded. This is history. Maybe you've experienced contempt, rejection, narcissism, toxic relationships, situations in which you were only given attention when you delivered something. Then the unconscious learns, I must be needed to be loved. That's why rest scares you, because deep down it seems to say, now you have nothing to offer. And for a mind that has experienced abandonment, this sounds like a sentence. Guilt comes as distorted protection. It tries to push you back into movement, because movement gives you a sense of control. And here's the trap. You run to not feel it. You produce so as not to face it. You fill your calendar so you don't hear the emptiness. And when you don't hear the emptiness, you don't find yourself. You don't start deep self-knowledge. You don't enter the journey of individuation. You only survive on autopilot. Let's put this down in plain Portuguese. The system wants you tired. Because tired people don't question it. Tired people accept crumbs. Tired people get into toxic relationships for fear of being alone. Tired people tolerate veiled criticism, disguised jealousy, emotional sabotage, because they don't have the energy to defend themselves. Guilt for resting is a tool to keep you available for work, for demands, for toxic people, for the opinion of others. And you know what's more dangerous? You start to think that this is normal. You start to think it's maturity, right? Emotional maturity is not about destroying yourself in silence. Emotional maturity is knowing how to stop without apologizing. Rest is a test of emotional autonomy. It is proof that you are not living by psychological projection, trying to prove something to someone. And when you finally rest without guilt, something changes. You begin to realize who respects you and who only tolerates you while you serve. You begin to see the hidden saboteurs. You start to feel your very high vibration bother certain people. Because when you stop exploring yourself, you become more lucid. And lucidity scares those who live in control. So yes, when you change, everything changes. When you stop, you start to see. And when you start to see it, a lot of things fall. Friendships begin to fade because they were based on utility. People start to criticize you because they can no longer access you as before. And then comes the resistance to change. They try to pull you back into the tired version of you. The version that said yes to everything, the version that was chasing. And at that point, you have two choices. Either you go back to the old cycle and call it adulthood, or you accept personal transformation and understand resting is protecting your energy. To rest is to protect your vibration. To rest is to say, I am not a machine. This is the beginning of inner healing. And inner healing is not pretty, it is firm, it is decision, it is to set limits, it is saying no, it is to cut ties when necessary, it is to end cycles with emotional maturity. Because if you don't, no one will do it for you. So here's a statement you need to swallow, even if it hurts. The guilt you feel when you rest is not proof of responsibility, it is a test of control. And as long as you obey that guilt, you will continue to be used by the system, by expectations, by people who walk away when you stop delivering. The question now is, will you continue to accept this guilt as the owner of your life, or will you transform this pause into higher consciousness? 2. Disguised self-exploitation. Most people don't realize when they start self-destructing, because destruction comes dressed up as virtue. It comes disguised as commitment, focus, discipline, rush. I do what needs to be done. You are proud to endure. You pride yourself on not stopping, and without realizing it, you are feeding the cruelest mechanism of the society of tiredness, self-exploitation. And here it is important to understand the trick. In the past, exploitation had a face. There was a boss shouting. There was a direct order. There was imposition. Today, in many cases, exploration happens with a smile. The system gives you goals, gives you promises, gives you a sense of freedom, and you squeeze yourself. You push yourself beyond the limit. You yourself ignore signs from the universe, signs from life, signs from the body. And when the body screams, you call it laziness. When the mind asks for pause, you call it weakness. This is self-exploitation in disguise. Byung-Chul is precise at this point. The subject of the performance is not a slave who is beaten. He is a volunteer. He chooses. He says, I can do it. And that's why he blames himself when he can't. Guilt is the fuel of self-exploitation. The more you charge yourself, the more you produce. The more you produce, the more you empty yourself. The more you empty yourself, the more you need to prove that you still have value. It's a cycle. Now he brings this to the emotional field because his channel talks to people who have been hurt by people. People who went through contempt, abandonment, narcissism. This audience has already experienced a kind of invisible exploitation within toxic relationships. They sucked your energy, sucked your attention, sucked your self-esteem. And what happens when you come out of it? If you don't heal, you change the explorer. Before you were the toxic person, now you are yourself. You start treating yourself like that narcissist treated you. Demanding too much, criticizing everything, invalidating fatigue, saying that you are only good when you deliver performance. This is the shadow of Carl Jung at work. Because the shadow is not just evil, the shadow is what you don't want to see in yourself. And one of the most common shadows is the shadow of the inner executioner. This inner executioner lives on a lie: if I stop, I lose my place. He believes that the world is a stage and that you have to always be proving it. He believes that if you rest, someone passes you, someone forgets you, someone abandons you. So it keeps you on constant alert. And constant alert is anxiety. It is low energetic frequency, even if you feign strength. It's a fake high vibration, one that's just adrenaline and control. And that's why so many people confuse organized life with tense life. The person says that he's growing inwardly, but he cannot remain silent for 10 minutes. She says she wants to expand her consciousness, but she's terrified of facing her own emptiness. She speaks of spiritual energy, but lives with her mind stuck in to-do lists and social comparison. This is not awakening of consciousness. This is sophisticated prison. Self-exploration also shows up in the way you deal with your own suffering. You turn pain into a project. You turn grief into content. You turn trauma into a goal. You don't give yourself time. You don't care about yourself. You only give yourself charges. And that kills self-healing, because self-healing doesn't happen in a hurry. It takes place in space. And space is rest. Let's talk about conscious distancing. To rest is to distance. It is to get out of the circle, to get out of the noise, to get out of the invisible demands. It's you saying, I'm not going to answer everything now. I'm not going to save everyone. I'm not going to explain myself to those who don't respect me. This is inner strength. This is emotional self-control. And here comes a point that your audience needs to hear because they live it. When you start to really rest, some people attack you. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're stopping being predictable. The person who exploited you emotionally begins to feel that they have lost access. The person who made veiled criticism begins to become more aggressive. The person who put you in games starts trying harder. It is the resistance to change. It is the fear of your light. It is the fear of your success, not just financial, but the success of having peace. And that's where you see the pattern. You realize that some relationships were energetically incompatible. You noticed but ignored it. Because I was too tired to end cycles. He was too tired to cut ties. I was too tired to say no. That's what self-exploration is all about. It robs you of the ability to decide. You become reactive. You live responding, running, putting out fires. And in the middle of that, you lose your strong presence. And strong presence is what makes someone respect you. It's not screaming, it's not drama, it's not revenge. It is presence. Rest, then, ceases to be a detail and becomes a strategy. Rest is recovering the ability to perceive, notice what you feel, realize what you tolerate, to realize where you betray yourself, realizing where you are living by the law of fear attraction, attracting situations because your subconscious mind is programmed to confuse love with effort. And now let's talk tough. If you don't learn to rest, you become easy prey. Easy prey for toxic people, easy prey for emotional sabotage, easy prey for manipulation, easy prey for one's own mind. You become someone who lives on the edge, and those who live on the edge accept anything so as not to be alone. And there is born the loneliness in the spiritual awakening. Not that good loneliness, but the loneliness of those who are surrounded and yet empty. The antidote is not to rest a little on Sunday. The antidote is to reconstruct identity. It is individuation. It's separating who you are from what you do. It is to stop treating your value as a number. It is to understand that higher consciousness is not to live accelerated, it is to live lucid. So from now on, you will look at rest in a different way. You will look and say, this is not a luxury, it is a limit, because limit is self-love, and self-love doesn't make noise. He decides. 3, the inner voice. There is a voice inside you that does not talk. It charges. She doesn't guide. She accuses. She doesn't ask how you're doing. She asks why you haven't done more. That voice is the core of the blame. It appears the moment you try to rest because it has been trained to keep you useful. And the most dangerous part is that you think she's you, but it is not. It is introjection. It is you carrying within you the culture, the demands, the veiled criticisms, the comparisons, the humiliations, the experiences of abandonment, all condensed in a narrative that seems personal, but is collective. Jung would call this the content of the collective unconscious mixed with its individual history, and Byung-Chul Han would point out that voice is the system speaking in the first person. Let's unmask that voice. She usually says like this: rest later, you didn't do enough, look what others are achieving, you're late, if you stop, you lose. And there is always an implicit threat: loss of value, loss of place, loss of love. She is not a neutral voice. She is an ancient survival mechanism that has been hijacked by a world of performance. Now, why is this voice so strong in people who have gone through toxic relationships? Because in these relationships, you've been trained to prove all the time. You were accused, you were compared, you were blamed for things that were not yours. You experienced psychological projection when the other threw their own shadow at you, and you, because you were sensitive, tried to fix everything. You have become responsible for someone's peace. This destroys emotional autonomy, and after that passes, that structure stays inside. You become your own judge. You create an internal court that never acquits you. And this court is not emotional maturity. It is wounded. The first step is silence as a symbol, not just the external silence, but the internal silence. That space where you don't react to the voice. You observe, you don't argue, you don't try to convince. You just realize, look at the charge again. This conscious distancing is the beginning of emotional self-control. Because while you fight with the voice, you're still stuck in it. You give energy, you feed it, you try to prove it, and proving is the game of performance, the game of the wounded ego, the game of those who still believe that they need to be perfect to deserve rest. Here comes a key to deep self-knowledge. Ask this: is this voice my age, or is it the age of my wound? Because it is often childish. She speaks as someone who had to be good to be loved. She speaks as someone who had to be useful in order not to be left. She speaks as someone who has learned that love comes with condition. And then you understand, it's not laziness what you feel, it's fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of losing control, fear of your own shadow, fear of facing emptiness, fear of discovering that you don't know who you are without the rush. Because when you stop, you find yourself. And if you've spent your whole life running away from yourself, that's scary. That is why many people say that they want spiritual awakening, high vibration, expansion of consciousness. But when silence arises, it fills with noise. Cell phone, notification, content, conversation, food, anything. Because silence shows. Silence reveals the psychological shadow. Silence reveals what you really feel, and that takes courage. Now, what does this inner voice have to do with self-respect? Everything. Because self-respect starts with the way you talk to yourself. You won't set boundaries with the world if you can't set boundaries with your own mind. You won't say no to toxic people if you say yes to the inner executioner every day. And this voice is often aligned with the system and with people who exploit you. It makes you respond quickly. It makes you justify yourself. It makes you run after it. It makes you accept crumbs so you don't miss the chance. It puts you in an energetic frequency of urgency. And urgency is a weapon. Those who live urgently live vulnerable. So you need to recover one thing: strong presence. Strong presence is when you stop, breathe, and choose the answer. It's not when you react, that's when you govern. And governing starts from within. A simple exercise, which is simple but not easy. When the guilt comes in the rest, you will appoint it. You will say in an internal voice, "This is program charging. This is old fear. This is the system talking." You're not going to try to be positive. You won't be wrong. You're just going to name it. Because to name is to de-hypnotize. And then you will ask a question that cuts through the delirium. What am I trying to prove now? Because there's always something. Prove that you are worthy, prove that you are strong, prove that you are not disposable, prove that you deserve to stay. That is the core of the wound. And when you see, you start to choose differently. And yes, when you start to choose differently, people who move away can appear. Friends can disappear. Relationships can cool down. Because your pattern changes. And those who lived by his standard will miss it. He will try to pull. It will use veiled criticism. He will use guilt. He will use jealousy in disguise. It will use manipulation. But that's when you prove that you're truly in personal transformation, not by speech, but by attitude. You rest and don't run back. You are silent and do not explain yourself. You distance yourself and don't apologize. You set boundaries and sustain it. This is individuation in practice. This is self-healing. And you start noticing signs from the universe, signs from life, subtle things. You notice that your body becomes lighter when you don't obey the voice. You notice that your mind becomes clearer. You realize that your very high vibration is not euphoria, it is stability. High vibration is when you are not controlled by guilt. So the final question of this block is direct. Will you continue to let that voice rule you, or will you take the inner lead? Because rest without guilt is not rest, it is inner freedom. 4. Productive shadow. There's a dark side to productivity that no one wants to admit. Productivity can become an addiction. It can turn into an escape. It can become anesthesia. You work, you do, you deliver, you run, not because you love what you do, but because you can't stand being silent with yourself. This is the point at which productivity ceases to be a tool and becomes a prison. And here Jung comes in heavy, because when you don't face your own shadow, it finds a way to boss you around. It disguises itself as a good thing. And one of the most socially accepted masks is the "I'm too busy" mask. You become someone who is always doing something. And that looks like admiration from the outside, but inside, it's fear. The productive shadow is that part of you that is terrified of being common, terrified of being invisible, terrified of being rejected. She carries a wound. If I don't impress, I'll be discarded. And this wound becomes motor. You live to prove it. You live to compensate. You live so that no one has a reason to abandon you. Do you see the perversity? You try to avoid abandonment by producing, but overproduction abandons you from yourself. You leave yourself behind. You trade rest for validation. You trade presence for results. And then he wonders why he is empty. The society of tiredness loves this shadow because it transforms pain into performance. It turns trauma into fuel. It transforms sensitive people into machines. And sensitive people, when they become a machine, lose their soul. It loses spiritual energy. It loses meaning. And then life becomes a theater of looking good. A lot of people in his audience went through narcissism. And one of the marks of toxic relationships is you learn to measure yourself by the look of the other. You learn to exist by approval. This becomes a standard. Even after the toxic person leaves, the logic remains. You continue to live as if you are being evaluated. This is called inverted psychological projection. Before, you tried to please the narcissist. Now you try to please the world. And the world is never satisfied because that world is an image in your mind, an invisible judge, an internal court. And the productive shadow lives for this judge. And why does resting seem wrong in this scenario? Because to rest is to get out of character. To rest is to say, I'm not going to play today. To rest is to stop feeding the persona. And Jung speaks of persona as the social mask. You use it to be accepted. But when you stick too much to the mask, you get lost. You live outside. Individuation is the opposite path. It is integrating, it's bringing it back, it is to become whole. And that requires you to face the shadow, not to blame yourself, but to understand. Understanding that your need to produce may be a desperate attempt to avoid old pain. Now let's touch on the point that many people feel and don't know how to name. When you start to rest and slow down, you feel an emptiness. And this emptiness is frightening, because in the void, memories appear, stored feelings appear. Loneliness appears in self-knowledge. The pain of losing friends appears. The feeling of non-belonging appears. The question arises, who am I without my deliveries? And then you have two ways out. Either you run away and get back into the rhythm, or you stay. And staying is emotional maturity. Staying is emotional self-control. Staying is the courage to face one's own shadow. And when you stay, something beautiful and hard happens. You start to see who really respects you. Because when you're not performing, when you're not delivering, when you're not always available, some people get angry. Some disappear. Some make veiled criticisms. Some call you selfish. Some try to pull you back to the old role, the role of the always strong, the role of the always solving. This is emotional sabotage, sometimes conscious, often not, because your change threatens their identity. Your peace pokes at their wounded ego. Their high vibration exposes their confusing energetic frequency, and here comes the fear of your light. Fear of your success comes. Resistance to change comes. And here's the point. You can't heal and please at the same time. You can't rest and continue to be what the system and certain people want. You have to choose, and choosing hurts, but it liberates. Rest is an act of cutting ties with an old identity. It is to end internal cycles. It's saying, I'm no longer that person who needs to prove. It is to say, I am presence, not performance. And when you do that, your very high vibration starts to be real. It's not euphoria, it's not cheap motivation, it's not the law of attraction as fantasy. It is the law of vibration as coherence. You vibrate what you live, and you live what you choose. If you choose peace, your life begins to expel what is energetically incompatible. This includes toxic people, it includes habits, it includes the need for comparison, includes the dependency on approval, it includes the addiction to produce. Yes, addiction, because it gives dopamine, it gives a sense of value, it gives a feeling of control, and the body becomes addicted to it. So you need an internal agreement. You need to say, I'll rest even when my shadow screams. Because the shadow will scream. She'll tell you you're wasting time. She'll tell you you're falling behind. She'll tell you that no one will love you if you don't deliver. But this is an old lie. And you respond with presence. You respond with silence. You respond with conscious detachment. You respond with limits. You respond with self-love. And then the inner strength that your audience is looking for is born. It is not the strength to fight with the world. It is the strength not to betray oneself. 5. Therapeutic silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is the absence of submission. That's when you stop explaining too much, justifying too much, chasing too much. It's when you don't surrender to the noise of the world, and especially to the noise of your mind. And that kind of silence is therapeutic because it gives you back the command. The society of tiredness hates silence because silence makes you realize, silence makes you think, silence makes you feel, and a system that wants you controlled doesn't want you conscious. He wants you distracted, he wants you busy. He wants you to react, not choose. That is why resting seems wrong, because resting brings silence, and silence brings truth, and truth is scary. Let's talk about silence as a symbol, as you asked in the briefing. On the symbolic level, silence represents border. It represents an inviolable internal space. It represents a protection. And protecting your energy isn't silly mysticism, it's psychology. It is you understanding that your subconscious mind absorbs the environment, absorbs the climate, absorbs people. If you live in noise, you become noise. If you live in silence, you become presence. And presence is a kind of power that doesn't scream. It is the presence that makes the toxic person reveal themselves. It is the presence that makes the narcissist lose control. Because the narcissist lives on reaction. He lives on a trigger. He lives to make you explain yourself. When you silence, you cut the food. You cut the game. And this goes for the system as well. The system lives on its reaction. Notification, urgency, fear of missing something, comparison. When you mute, you get out of the flow. You create conscious distance. And detachment is where higher consciousness is born. Now let's get practical. Therapeutic silence is not disappearing as a punishment. It's not a game. It is not coldness to manipulate. It's emotional self-control. It's you not responding on impulse. It's not defending yourself from an accusation that doesn't even make sense. It's not explaining yourself to those who have already decided to interpret you wrong. This is emotional maturity. Many people who have gone through abandonment have an automatic reflex. When tension arises, they run to fix it. She runs to talk. She rushes to justify. She rushes to prove it. This is trauma. This is fear. That's the psychological shadow at work. Because deep down, there is a belief, if I remain silent, I will be left. But the truth is different. Often, the more you talk, the more you diminish yourself. The more you explain yourself, the more you give access for toxic people to enter your mind. The more you chase after it, the less respect you get. Because respect is not born of effort. Respect is born of limits. So therapeutic silence is a workout, a training session to endure the discomfort of not reacting, a training to bear guilt. A workout to endure anxiety, a training to endure emptiness, because there in the void you begin to see your unconscious behaviors. You begin to notice your unconscious reactions. You realize that your haste to respond is not love, it is fear. You realize that your need to always be available is not kindness, it is wound. You realize that your kindness is sometimes just a way to avoid conflict. And avoiding conflict makes you swallow things, and swallowing things makes you sick. Silence also helps you detect energetic envy and jealousy in disguise, because when you don't explain yourself, the other shows what they really want. The person who likes you respects your space. The person who uses you tries to invade. Simple. And this is where your channel's audience identifies itself. Sensitive, empathetic, spiritual people, tired of chasing, want to be respected through depth, silence, and strong presence. And that doesn't come with beautiful speech. It comes with posture. Therapeutic silence is the posture of those who know their own value, and who knows their own value does not negotiate rest with guilt. It does not negotiate peace urgently. It does not negotiate health with other people's demands. And here comes rest again. Rest is bodily silence. It's you turning off the engine. And when you turn off the engine, you hear it. You hear what your soul is asking for. You hear what your mind is hiding. You hear the truth that was muffled. And that truth can hurt. It can bring loneliness in spiritual awakening. It can bring loss of friends. It can bring that feeling, I'm changing and no one understands. This is normal, because when you change, everything changes. Your field changes. Your high vibration changes. And what was energetically compatible before may no longer be. That doesn't mean you've turned better. It means that you have become more whole. Individuation is that. It's getting out of the persona. It is to stop living to please. It's coming home from the inside, and silence is the way back. Not aggressive silence, not silence of punishment, silence of internal authority. So in practice, you're going to use 3 silences. Silence so as not to react, silence so as not to justify himself, silence to listen. And when guilt comes at rest, you use the most powerful silence, the silence that does not argue with the inner executioner. You just rest. And this reprograms. This is self-healing. This is real personal development. This is expansion of consciousness that does not become a ready-made phrase. 6. Sacred boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are lockable doors. Boundaries are what protect your energy, your mind, your vibration. And if you feel guilty about resting, it's because your limits have been invaded for too long. Invaded by work, by expectations, by family, by friends, by toxic relationships, by people who disappear and reappear when they want. And when you live like this, rest feels wrong because you were never allowed to stop. So let me tell you firmly, no one is going to give you that permission. You have to take it. Sacred boundaries are those that you set without feeling the need to justify. Because the problem of many people is not lack of limit, it is lack of support. She even tries to say no, but then she explains too much, gives in, backtracks, apologizes. This is guilt. This is fear. That's wounded ego trying to be accepted. And here comes the psychological point. Those who have abandoned feel that limits are risks, because limits can drive away. And yes, it can drive away. But look at the question that no one wants to ask. Remove whom? Keeping toxic people away? To fend off manipulators? Push away those who only value you when you are destroying yourself? So maybe this distancing is a cure. Rest is a limit. It's you saying, not now. And this is revolutionary for those who have lived under pressure and emotional exploitation. Because you have been trained to always be available, responding quickly, proving love with effort, accepting crumbs, tolerating veiled criticism, swallowing jealousy in disguise, to accept emotional sabotage as normal. When you start resting consistently, you create an invisible boundary. Your body and mind stop being public territory, and a lot of people will be bothered. Because a lot of people were used to having unlimited access. It is at this moment that the true character of relationships appears. Some people respect it, others test. Testing the limit is a sign. It's a sign that the person doesn't respect you, respects the control they had over you. And that's hard, but it's liberating. Jungian psychology explains an interesting phenomenon here. When you set a limit, you force the other to face their own shadow. Because if the other was using you to relieve their own anxiety, to fill their own emptiness, to feel superior, your limit cuts that. And then the other reacts with anger, irony, manipulation, guilt. That's his shadow showing. And he tries to play at you. You will hear things like, you have changed, you are cold, you are finding yourself, you don't care about anyone anymore. This is psychological projection. It's the other trying to put you back in the old role. It is resistance to change. And that's where your emotional maturity comes in. You don't argue, you don't explain yourself, you sustain it, you maintain a strong presence. Because strong presence is the limit standing without shouting. Sacred boundaries also have to do with saying no to one's own excess. Yes, you also need to limit yourself. You need to put limits on the screen, on the work, on the rhythm, on the addiction to doing. You need to get out of self-exploration. And this requires real discipline. Not discipline to produce more, discipline to stop. Think about how this changes your practical life. When you rest without guilt, you improve your self-confidence. Because you're showing yourself that you protect yourself. You improve your self-love because you're saying to your subconscious mind, I matter. You improve your spiritual energy. Because energy is not born from excess, it is born from balance. And here I'm going to be direct with your audience, who like to punch you in the face. Those who do not protect their energy become the emotional deposit of others. It becomes a trash can. He becomes a therapist for toxic people. It becomes an infinite shoulder. And then he complains that no one respects him. Respect comes when you stop being deposit. The most difficult sacred limit is this: not to negotiate with guilt. Because guilt is the internal argument that says that limits are selfishness. But it is not. Selfishness is destroying yourself so as not to disappoint. That's a lack of love for you. And when you set limits, you start noticing signs from the universe, signs from life. You notice that certain doors close, but others open. You notice that some people disappear, but your peace increases. You realize that in solitude, in self-knowledge, there is a kind of power, because you start to suffice yourself. And that changes everything in relationships, because a person who is enough does not run after it. Don't beg. He does not accept crumbs. He does not tolerate gambling. She chooses. And choosing is the essence of emotional autonomy. So from now on, the limit will be your language, and rest will be one of your most sacred limits. Because without rest, you have no clarity. Without clarity, you fall into the same hole. Without clarity, you attract the same pattern, by the law of attraction of the unconscious, by habit, by trauma. Limit is healing, and healing is a daily choice. 7. Unwavering presence. Most people think that power is control of the other. Right. Real power is self-control. It is to be whole in one's own body, in one's own mind, in one's own decision. It's not being dragged by anxiety, guilt, fear, the need for validation. This is an unwavering presence. And why does this have everything to do with resting without guilt? Because guilt destroys your presence. It takes you out of the now and throws you into an imaginary future. You're going to be late. You're going to lose. You're going to fail. It puts you in an energetic frequency of scarcity. And scarcity makes you reactive. You become easy prey. Unwavering presence is born when you stop and stay whole, when you rest and don't dismount, when you are silent and do not despair, when you walk away and don't beg. This is conscious distancing. This is emotional self-control. The unwavering presence is also what protects you from manipulation. Toxic people work as a test. They try to pull your energy into chaos. They try to make you explain. They try to make you chase after it. They try to put you in your usual place. And if you don't have presence, you fall. That's why rest is presence training, because at rest there is no distraction. You are with you. And if you don't like to be with yourself, you run. But if you learn to stay, you get stronger. Jung would say that this is part of the process of individuation, separating oneself from the collective, separating oneself from the persona, separating oneself from expectations, and building an inner center. That center is the self, not the ego. And when you live from that center, you stop being controlled by applause and by criticism. And then you understand a hard point. A lot of people respect you not because they love you, but because you are firm. Respect is not affection. Respect is limit and presence. In the real world, the unwavering presence changes your posture, changes your look, changes your tone, changes your way of responding. You don't respond quickly. You don't respond with excess. You answer accurately. And that messes with those who wanted to control you. And yes, this can generate energetic envy, because when someone sees you stable, resting without guilt, while the other is stuck in rush and anxiety, it bothers you. Because it exposes the lack of autonomy of the other. It exposes the wounded ego of the other. And then there are veiled criticisms, jokes, attempts to belittle you. This is where emotional maturity comes in. You don't enter the game. You don't prove yourself. You don't fight to be understood. You maintain presence. You keep silent. You keep a limit. And this is an inner strength that few have. Now, unwavering presence is not emotional coldness in the bad sense. It is not turning to stone. It is to become an anchor. It's about feeling it but not getting lost. It's about recognizing emotions but not being dominated. It's having spiritual energy without becoming naive. It is having a high vibration without becoming toxic optimism. And that's important because your audience is sensitive. Empaths are easily lost. They absorb climate, they absorb guilt, they absorb demand, and they confuse absorbing with loving. It's not love, it's a lack of limits. Unwavering presence is the opposite. It's you love without destroying yourself. It's you helping without becoming a deposit. It's you being good without being used. Rest is part of it, because it gives you recovery, physical and mental recovery, emotional recovery, spiritual recovery. And without recovery, you become reactive, and reactivity is the open door to old patterns. And then we return to the central theme, guilt for resting. Guilt is the mechanism that tries to prevent their presence. Because if you rest, you gain clarity. If you gain clarity, you begin to cut ties. If you cut ties, you free yourself. And the system loses a servo. Toxic people miss a target. So yes, guilt will try to sabotage you. You'll hear inside, "That's a waste of time." And you answer with a simple phrase, "I rest to be whole." It is not a motivational phrase, it's a decision. And when you become whole, everything changes. When you change, everything changes. You change your patterns. You change what you accept. You change the type of relationship you enter. You change the kind of conversation you tolerate. You change your energetic frequency. And life begins to filter. Energetically incompatible people move away. And that can hurt. It can generate loneliness in spiritual awakening. It can generate a feeling of, "I don't have anyone else." But this phase is a passage, because the space that remains is where the new comes in. Real people enter. More honest relationships enter. Peace enters. Unwavering presence is not despairing in this interval. It's you enduring the emptiness without running back to the old. That's strength. 8. Strategic rest. If you think rest is weakness, you've already lost the war. Because the real war is not against the world, it is against its own fragmentation. Rest is a strategy for psychological survival. Rest is what keeps you from becoming a functioning body and an erased soul. And here I want to take away the romantic idea of rest. It's not cuddly self-love. Strategic rest is discipline. It's a decision. It is a limit applied. Byung-Chul shows that the performance subject does not know how to stop. He has apparent freedom, but he is a prisoner of his own impulse. He lives in a logic of always more. And that doesn't end well. It ends in burnout. It ends in apathy. It ends in emptiness. It ends in masked depression. Now, the strategic rest is the opposite. It is the act of regaining command. You decide to stop before you break down. You decide to close the door before you are invaded. You decide to step back to observe. This is conscious distancing, and distancing gives you an advantage. In relationships, at work, in life, think about your audience, people who have already gone after it, people who have already begged, people who have already humbled themselves emotionally for someone. This is the effect of a tired mind. A tired mind accepts crumbs. A rested mind chooses. And here comes a point that almost no one talks about. Rest also alters your perception. When you're tired, you interpret everything as a threat. You imagine rejection everywhere. You become more sensitive to veiled criticism. You are more vulnerable to manipulation. You become more needy. And neediness is a magnet for toxic relationships. When you rest, you regulate the system. You get clarity again. And clarity is the basis of self-respect. You can't have self-love living exhausted, because burnout makes you negotiable. Strategic rest also has to do with the law of vibration, not in the superficial mystical sense, but in the practical sense. Your internal state determines your choices. If you live in urgency, you attract urgency. If you live in guilt, you attract charges. If you live in peace, you attract more mature relationships, or at least you don't accept immature ones. The law of attraction, when spoken seriously, is this: it is not thinking positive. It's you understanding that your subconscious chooses patterns. If you're exhausted, your subconscious seeks quick relief. People who promise, people who manipulate, addictions, distractions. If you're rested, your subconscious sustains difficult decisions such as cutting ties, ending cycles, saying no. And here comes the practical question: how to turn rest into a strategy without becoming laziness. With structure, you decide break times. You decide moments of silence. You decide days without noise. You decide screen limits. You decide what goes in and what doesn't go into your mind, and you do it without negotiating with guilt. Guilt will appear because it is resistance to change. She's the old identity trying to pull you in. But you don't argue with her, you execute. Rest is execution. And do you know what happens after a while? Guilt weakens, because the subconscious mind learns by behavior. If you rest and nothing explodes, if you rest and the world doesn't end, if you rest and you stay alive, the body learns. Anxiety decreases. The inner voice loses strength, and you start to feel something that your audience really wants: inner peace. Inner peace, in the right way, is not the absence of a problem. He is a strong presence despite the problem, and that comes with recovery. And here I'm going to be tough. If you keep saying that you can't rest, you're saying that you have no control over your own life, and maybe you don't. But then the first thing to recover is this: emotional autonomy. Because autonomy is not only in relationships, it is in the agenda, it's in the body, it's in the mind. Strategic rest is to reclaim your territory. It's you protecting your energy. It is you protecting your high vibration. It's you saying, I'm not the property of the world, and those who don't understand this will try to control you. And when you start to rest, a side effect happens. You start noticing people who drain you. You notice that certain conversations weigh you down. You realize that certain friends only show up when they need to. You realize that certain family members only value you when you sacrifice yourself. This is deep self-knowledge. This is expansion of consciousness. This is awakening of consciousness. And then you start to cut ties calmly, no drama, no ad, without explaining. You just change. And when you change, everything changes. And this, in the beginning, brings loneliness in self-knowledge. But this loneliness is part of personal transformation because it creates space, and space is where the new version is born. The version that doesn't blame itself for resting, the version that doesn't run behind, the version that doesn't negotiate limits, the version that is not lost in psychological projection. Strategic rest is the discipline of becoming whole. 9. Practical individuation. Individuation is not a pretty theory. It is daily practice. It's getting out of collective autopilot and becoming someone who chooses their own life. Jung is not talking about becoming special. He's talking about becoming true, entire, coherent. And it starts when you realize that the guilt of resting is a sign that you're still living more for the other than for yourself. Practical individuation begins with a separation. Noise separation, persona separation, separation of expectations, separation of the papers they gave you, the role of the strong, the role of the savior, the role of the productive, the role of the available, and you start asking, who am I when no one is looking at me? This question is scary because a lot of people don't know. A lot of people just know how to work. And then you understand why rest is so uncomfortable. It puts you in front of the question, In individuation, you also face the shadow of Carl Jung. The shadow is not just the aggressive side. It is also the tired side, the needy side, the side that wants to be taken care of, the side that wants to stop. If you reject this side, it comes back as a symptom: burnout, irritation, apathy, meaninglessness. So practical individuation includes accepting your humanity without humbling yourself for it. It includes accepting the body. It includes accepting the limit. It includes accepting that you're not a machine. Now let's tie this to your audience. Those who have experienced narcissism usually have difficulty in individuation because they lived for the sake of the other. He lived adapting. He lived molding himself. He lived trying to avoid explosions, avoiding abandonment. This generates a pattern. You lose touch with your will. You become someone who waits for a sign from the other to exist. Individuation is the opposite. It's you regaining your will, regain your emotional autonomy, regain your self-esteem. And how is this done in practice? First, you identify where you're betraying yourself, where you say yes meaning no, where you stay so you are not alone, where you respond out of fear, where you work to prove, where you blame yourself for resting. Second, you create small breaks. You start going to sleep earlier. You start turning off your phone. You start not responding right away. You start saying no without explaining. You start to move away from toxic people. You start to end cycles without ad-listing. This is cutting ties. This is setting limits. That's protecting your energy. Third, you sustain the discomfort, because discomfort is the price of change. Resistance to change will appear. Guilt will appear. Anxiety will appear. Fear of your light will show up both in you and in others, and you sustain it. Fourth, you integrate. You don't become a cold person because of trauma. You become a firm person by conscience. You don't become someone isolated by anger. You become someone selective by emotional maturity. And in the midst of this, your high vibration begins to be a consequence. It is not law of attraction as promise. It is law of vibration as effect. You vibrate coherence. You vibrate presence. You vibrate the limit. And this removes what does not match. This drives away people who are energetically incompatible. This drives away hidden saboteurs. This drives away toxic relationships. And yes, it brings loss of friends. It brings solitude in spiritual awakening. But this loneliness has a meaning. It is the interval between the old life and the new. And you need to cross without running back to the old man out of fear. Practical individuation also means looking at your tiredness as a message. Tiredness is not just a lack of energy, it is a lack of alignment. Sometimes you're tired because you're living a life that's not yours, a life to please, a life to prove, a life to be accepted, and the body cannot stand to sustain lies for long. So rest becomes a real ritual, a space where you find yourself, a space where you listen, a space where you perceive signs of life, signs of the universe, not as superstition, but as fine perception. You notice what nourishes you and what drains you, and here comes a firm statement. Individuation is you stop being ruled by guilt, because guilt is always an attempt to put you back in your place, in place of the old you who ran after him, the old you explained yourself, the old you who sacrificed yourself to be loved, the new you rest, the new you do not negotiate peace, the new you respect yourself. And when you respect yourself, others learn. 10. Inner freedom. Inner freedom is not doing what you want. It is not being a slave to what you feel on impulse. It is not to be a slave to guilt. It is not to be a slave to the gaze of others. It is not to be a slave to the system. It's having an internal center that doesn't change with people's moods. And the guilt of resting is the opposite of that. It's slavery. It's you being pulled by an invisible rope. It's you standing still physically, but running inside. And this is not rest. This is prison. Inner freedom begins when you understand you don't have to deserve to rest. You don't have to pay with suffering to have peace. This is the oldest lie of the wounded ego. The lie that you can only relax after you've tasted something, and this something never ends, because the system always invents more. So inner freedom requires a cut, a symbolic and practical cut. The cut of saying, I'm not going to live justifying myself anymore. And this cut changes everything in your emotional field. You stop accepting toxic relationships. You stop chasing. You stop begging for crumbs. You stop living in psychological projection, trying to guess what the other thinks of you. You come back to yourself. And returning to oneself in Jung is the path of the self. It is individuation. It's integration. It is facing the shadow. It is to recognize their wounds without letting them drive the car. When you gain inner freedom, guilt loses power, because guilt lives on blackmail. If you rest, you will be punished. And the punishment is almost always imaginary. It's fear, it's trauma, it's memory, it is unconscious. And when you go through that fear, you realize something simple: nothing happens. You rest, you stay alive. You rest, the world keeps turning. You rest, and instead of losing, you win. You gain clarity, you gain health, you gain presence, you gain real spiritual energy. And this energy changes your social life. You start to attract less chaos. You start refusing more noise. You begin to choose silence. You start to choose conscious distancing. You begin to protect your high vibration, and that's a natural filter. Yes, some people disappear from your life. People who disappear from your life are not punishing you. They are revealing themselves, because they wanted access to a tired version of you, a manipulable version, a version that blames itself. When you get out of it, they miss the door. And that is liberating, because you no longer have to live in fear of losing people who never respected you. You no longer have to live in fear of being alone, because you learn to inhabit your own company. Solitude in self-knowledge becomes a kind of training. It strengthens you. It shows you that you don't need noise to exist. And then his presence becomes strong. Your energy stands firm. Your mind is cleared. And this also affects your way of loving. You stop loving as if begging. You start to love as if you choose. You stop accepting someone out of need. You start to choose by compatibility. Energetically incompatible are obvious. Mature relationships become attractive. Respect becomes a requirement. And then you understand a point that unites Byung-Chul, Han and Jung. The system wants to keep you out of yourself. Jung calls you in. The system wants to keep you performing. Jung calls you to truth. The system wants to keep you tired. Jung calls you to integration. Han denounces the machine. Jung shows the way out. Inner freedom is this way out. It is not a magic lighting. It is a repeated decision. It is a repeated limit. It is repeated rest. It is saying no repeated. It is repeated silence. It is repeated emotional self-control. And little by little, the guilt becomes just an echo. She shows up, but she doesn't send it. You listen and don't obey. You notice it and you don't run. You rest and don't explain yourself. And then you close this cycle with the most important phrase in the video. Resting is not stopping life. To rest is to recover life. Because life is not what you deliver. Life is what you live inside. And when you recover that, you don't just become someone more productive. You become someone freer. And freedom is what the system fears the most.